name is Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
I hope I pronounce her name properly. Thais Gibson.
I am so excited for you to be here with me today. Thank you for joining us. Welcome back to another episode of Can This Be Fixed, where we talk all about different attachment style questions that come from you listening. And we do a deep dive into some of your real life questions, and we go through different answers and pieces of insight that we can share. So my name is Thais, if you're new here, and I used to be a fearful avoidant, aka disorganized attachment style, very strongly for a very long time before doing a whole lot of work on this. And this is my co-host, Mike Tizio, who used to be a dismissive avoidant and who's become securely attached through doing a lot of the work over the years as well. So in today's episode, we are going to talk a little bit about a few core questions. Number one, we're going to talk about what happens if a dismissive avoidant breaks up with an anxious attachment style after minor arguments. Is there a time to talk it through, or is it better to just move on? Then we'll dive into, in the second part of the segment, what to do if you have different love languages and even feel a big sense of withdrawing with somebody who has an avoidant attachment style. And then we'll go into what to do if somebody exemplified extremely unhealthy patterns of behavior after a breakup. And this person who asked this question, Sir MK, thinks that this person might have been an anxious attachment style, but I would actually beg to differ from the question. And it seems to me like there may be some narcissistic traits. So we're going to get into that too here today. So I'll kick off and I will share the first question. And I'll actually share my screen here so that you can see this question and also see where, if you want any of your questions answered, you can actually post right here on Reddit as well under the thread, Can This Be Fixed? So the very first question here is from Spooky. And Spooky says specifically, hi, Thais. I'm pretty sure my guy is DA. And we had the best time for the first 2 years. He treated me like a princess and was super into me, but we had some arguments and he broke up with me at the end of year 3 because he didn't like the emotional volatility. At the time, I didn't know PDS, so was able to move on after each argument, but we didn't get to the root cause, our attachment styles, etc. He's kept negative feelings inside and he took it to heart every time we argued. I could tell he changed a lot, but we talked and got back together until he broke up with me again after another argument 4 months after that. Number one, why didn't he show any DA traits in the first 2 years? And why was he so attached to me despite being a DA? Is it chemical or limerence, which is normal in the beginning? Number two, should I try to talk it through with him again and stress that this can be fixed, or can it? It's not a bad relationship. The first time I tried to talk to him, when we both calmed down, he told me he gets it, but he just doesn't feel the same way anymore. So he'd rather not continue because the feelings are not there or strong enough. Does he just want someone who's perfect at being with him? Should he change that perception? It's not my job to fix it, right? And number three, how do I handle the discomfort of having to leave everything I know in a healthy and empowering way? Us going our separate ways means I have to move back to my country and finding a new job, which feels so uncomfortable. Okay, so let's dive right into this. Mike, if you want to kick it off, we can sort of start by just talking about why those DA traits weren't really showing up in the first couple of years.
Yeah, so from personal experience too, I can answer this. The first year, 2 years in the relationship is kind of like your dating / honeymoon phase as well. DAs really enjoy this period because there's not a whole lot of expectations or for like emotional support and how they're going to show up as a very giving person and having to meet somebody else's needs. DAs are very used to meeting their own needs, and they really hope that you are supposed to meet your own needs as well. So basically in the first year or two, like I said, it can be very easy for a DA because they think, things are light, things are easy, there's not too much drama, which when someone says drama, that just means actually like real human emotion is being shared and shown. So if somebody says like, I don't want drama in my life or whatever, that's kind of a clue they're probably a little more avoidant and just don't want to deal with like sort of highly emotional issues or being vulnerable. So anyway, first couple of years can show up really well because like I said, there's just not a lot of ask from the partner. They're sort of happy just being with the person and enjoying each other and, kind of seeing them through rose-colored glasses. It's then after that where, the power struggle phase comes in, the mask off comes, where the other partners start to feel more comfortable to ask for their needs to be met. The other partner is more comfortable now to ask for, things that they want, things that they expect, maybe asking about, hey, where's this relationship going? Like, we've been dating for a couple of years now. Like, let's have some intention, let's have some direction. And this really turns a DA back into their shell where they want to just kind of like push away because they're like, oh, this isn't fun anymore. This is like a lot of go ahead. I know you're just dying.
And what's like the internal, just so if anybody's listening, they're not like, because I don't think it's exactly like, oh my gosh, it's not fun at all. They don't care anymore, like immediately. But like, what's the internal relationship? Is it like fear? Is it like stress? Is it overwhelm? Like, what do you find in your past experiences would be your internal relationship to that phase when it creeps up?
Yeah, totally. I'll tell you the whole underlying thing to it from me in the past was I thought if the relationship is meant to be together, if you're meant to be with that person, there shouldn't be any fighting, there shouldn't be any highs and lows and fights and conflict. And I just thought if we're not perfect together, if we don't always have this sort of honeymoon phase, well, simply we're just not meant to be together. Why would you want to be with someone if you guys are fighting and not getting along? So my sort of avoidant mind was like, there's for sure somebody better out there for me. There's for sure somebody who's better suited for me. Because like I said, if it's to be the perfect relationship, we're going to be always happy. We're going to be always, understanding each other. We're always going to be having a good time, laughing. There's not going to be all this sort of negativity. And I was like, so wrong, just to let you guys know, like, I don't believe that. I don't believe I'm perfect. So there's no way someone else is going to be perfect. So anyway, just to answer your question, yeah, I think there is a lot of a myth in where the DA thinks, oh, like, hey, this is not proper. This should be feeling good all the time.
And I don't want to like interrupt you too much because I know that you have so much more to say, but I just think that's so important because it's such a breakthrough. And like, it's honestly a representation of like the dismissive avoidance learned helplessness. Like if they don't know because they haven't had healthy modeling for how to do conflict, then it's like, okay, well, the expectation is that somebody does conflict like perfectly from their own end so that we don't have to do it together. I don't have to get involved. And there's underneath it, it's so funny because you actually see this in like all different attachment styles. Every place that we have extreme expectations of things that are like miscalculated or not necessarily like realistic is exactly the place that we're in the biggest learned helplessness with ourselves. So like DAs don't have healthy modeling for conflict. They don't know how to do conflict in a really good way and strengthen their resilience at conflict. It's not that like there should be no conflict. It should be that we get better at conflict. And then we resolve things more, which ends up inevitably leading to less conflict as you make it out of the power struggle stage. But like when I was fearful avoidant, I would be like, nobody should ever, ever, ever break my trust because I had trust wounds. And so I was in learned helplessness for how to fix my trust wounds. So I would project that out to someone else, or like anxious attachment styles, or like somebody should always be there to soothe me. I should never have somebody not be there when I need them. And again, that's like their learned helplessness because they don't know how to self-soothe. So it's really interesting how it kind of like threads through. But anyways, I'll let you get back to it. I just really wanted to dive into that for a second.
Yeah, no, those are great points and very important. Just, to wrap up sort of from our viewer's question was, I think they were saying, oh, should I be the one to, show the person that, hey, this is the relationship's worth it and, nobody's perfect and whatnot. Sadly, I think that's everybody's realization they need to have for themselves. It's kind of like you can lead the horse to water, but not make them drink. So there was just, I don't think anybody in my most unhealed times could have convinced me that there's not a perfect person for you. I always thought there has to be this perfect person out there. So unfortunately, it's kind of, like I said, it's kind of their journey. It's their learning that they're going to have to figure out. And, the viewer mentioned, oh, this means they might have to go back to their country and find another job or whatnot. Yes, I know that's really inconvenient, but we can't like let, an inconvenient life situation get in the way of staying in something that's not great for us. So I'm leaning towards possibly not being able to be fixed in this one, just because it doesn't sound like the other person is doing a lot of work and might not have a lot of awareness of these things. And I'm curious to hear what you think. Do you think this one can be fixed, or?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that whenever I see situations like this, I always look at the balance of red to green flags. So like the thing I look for first is like if somebody leaves the relationship, they're the one that exited, for there to be incentive for the person who got left in the relationship to think of reinvesting and showing up and trying to make it work. You would need to see the amount of red flags with the person leaving suddenly like boomerang and have more green flags. So for example, in this case, for it to be like something that I would say, yeah, give it a shot, try it out, it's worthwhile investing, I would be looking at it going, well, I would need to see the DA come back and be like, hey, I've been doing self-work. I realize that I have to get better at conflict, or I realize my side of the argument, or I've been in counseling, or whatever it is. So you need to see like accountability. You need to see like a clear action plan for how this person's going to invest and make the relationship work. And instead, you're basically getting the opposite, unfortunately, right? Like there's this part where it's like, he's like, oh yeah, my feelings aren't strong enough. And honestly, what I've seen too, a lot of the time is dismissive avoidants like lose feelings because they're kind of feeding into that perception. They're like, well, this isn't the right person because there's conflict and because we're not in the honeymoon stage, and sort of putting it on that like, and honestly, I think the idea of a perfect person is its own like defense mechanism to avoid commitment, because it's like, oh, if we have this perfect image of somebody that nobody's ever going to reach that standard, then it's almost like we can flaw find according to that. And it's almost this like strategy to maintain distance, not consciously, of course, but like at a subconscious level. And so, what we're seeing is, to your point, Mike, like I agree. I think that, to Spooky said in here, it's not my job to fix it, right? And unfortunately, like it's not your job. Your job is in your 50% of 100% of the relationship. And his job is in that 50% there. And ideally, we want to each show up 100% in our 50%. And it looks like Spooky's here to do that, right? It looks like Spooky's like 100% ready in here doing the work, going through, learning about all this stuff, trying to gain knowledge, asking questions, and really showing up. And unfortunately, like I see the red to green flag balance being like so disproportionate, so many more red flags that the relationship wouldn't work than green flags. And it's not because of the attachment style. Like, sometimes you'll see a DA come back and be like, hey, I want to show up. I want to do the work. I'm working on myself. Like we have so many great DAs in PDS. You're a great example of a DA who's in full recovery. But just when we look at this, it's like, unfortunately, by holding on to hoping that this, will change or transform, or that this person will show up, you keep like your life and your future of like what you're up to next, finding a new job that's like a great fit for you, all those things that you have ahead of you. If you put them on hold, hoping somebody will come around and change their mind, I think unfortunately there's too big of a chance you're going to get left in the gray area, and it's just going to be dragged out. And then that person doesn't show any initiative towards trying to make it work or trying to change it. And so I think it's great that you're on this journey, Spooky. I think that it's amazing that you're doing the work to heal your AP stuff, to work on improving the relationship. But I also think that you have to honor yourself in this particular case, because even though he showed up in a really great way for that early couple of years, once that power struggle stage comes up, that's where we see people's attachment styles and differences the most. And if that person then pulled away and said, I don't have the feelings to keep reinvesting, I don't see any incentive to continue forward.
And Tice, I know you always encourage people to sort of do the inner work, do your own healing first, and then set like a bit of a timeline. So if you want, and you feel you want to give this one last shot, maybe set a timeline of, I'm going to be doing the inner work and healing my wounds as best as I can, working on my own boundaries, triggers, etc. And if things aren't improving in the next 2-3 months, then I can comfortably walk away and say this wasn't for me. Because what's amazing is you get so much clarity when you get to clear your own stuff. Basically, it can go two ways. You can be like, wow, like I'm so much better at communicating now. I don't get triggered at certain things. I can sort of come to my partner when there's an issue and not let my emotions take over. You know, if you're AP, not have your wounds sort of take over. So you just become so much better at in the relationship and helping the relationship. Or it can flip to the other side where you see your worth and you see what you will put up with, and you're like,
Yeah.
you know what, this is actually something I might have wanted 6 months ago, and it felt right, but it only felt right because it was sort of satisfying a lot of your subconscious comfort zone. But sometimes it can be like, you know what, this is for sure not the relationship for me, and I'm really happy that this happened because it forced me to do the work on myself, but I think it's time to exit. So what I'm trying to say in a roundabout way is you have the most amount of control and power in working on yourself and doing the inner work on yourself. So don't spend too much time trying to analyze and figure out the other person. Pour more of that energy back into yourself, give yourself a bit of a timeline, and then you can make a decision with sort of a clear mind.
Yeah, I love that. And I think too, it can be really useful to write down, like, what are the things I want in a partner? Like just the baseline, like what are the things I really want? And
Yeah.
hopefully some of those things are like somebody who shows up equally to me or wants to invest in the relationship reciprocally, or somebody who's also doing the work or wants to resolve discussions or arguments. Put out that list of those things that are really important to you. And then I would actually ask yourself, like, based on these standards that I have of what I'm looking for in a relationship, does this person meet these right now? Because I think too, like, the deadline's a really good thing to do, but I also see that this person's not even showing up for any of those baseline standards. And often I find the deadline to be the best when somebody's actually like in the relationship in some way and trying to invest. And there really seems to be such an absence of that in this particular case. And so for sure, get clear, use that timeline as a strategy to get clear. I definitely agree with that. But also don't be afraid to be like, what am I actually looking for? And is this person really filling any of those buckets right now? And making sure you don't say, well, in the future, they might change, because then we date somebody's potential or we date like our own fantasy of somebody in the future. So diving into that at a deeper level, I think we'll just really get that clarity as well, along with the deadline or timeline.
I love that. That's a great idea. And definitely dating someone's potential is like kind of the surest way to be disappointed because, people do change and can change, but overall, you're not going to change someone like completely 180 unless they're all in on trying to change. But I love that idea of sort of having it out there on paper and seeing, hey, does this match this person, and sort of remove any emotion to it and just kind of look at it on paper and see if they have the things that you're actually looking for in your life. So
Awesome.
great idea.
Awesome stuff. So we're going to be right back. And when we're back, we are going to dive into talking about different love languages and what to do if you have a different relationship to love languages from your partner, or even just ways that you give and receive love based on your needs or your attachment style. And can it be fixed if there are major differences there? Stay tuned and we'll be right back. I just wanted to pop in here and let you know we are doing a 7-day free trial to the All Access Membership Pass at PDS, which means you get access to literally everything inside of the school. And this includes the 4 live webinars I do with our students every single week. And on top of that, you get access to all of our different courses. We have over 55 different courses on relationships, communication, boundaries, emotional mastery, guilt and shame, learning your needs, so many different facets that are really important to master our lives and feel really good about our lives going forward. And last but not least, there's a daily community event. We have trained facilitators and coaches who are in there doing that work, showing up to support you on your journey every single day. Please join me on the other side. Come check it out. See if it's a fit for you. I'd love to see you there. Go ahead and sign up by clicking the link in the description box below. Welcome back to another part of Can This Be Fixed? Let's talk about different love languages. So this question kind of starts off, and I read through it very briefly, but I think it starts off with some, attachment style discussions and love language discussions, but then really goes into like, how do we really give and receive love with somebody with a different attachment style as a whole? So Critical Let 6750 says, my recently ex-boyfriend and I have different love languages. Mine are physical touch and quality time. and his are acts of service and gifts giving. We struggled immensely with these differences because I need touch to feel secure and loved, and he gets uncomfortable with too much. At times, I even felt alone when we were together, and it caused fighting and friction. It made me feel insecure that he didn't love me as much. I would then get jealous of other women because I was afraid there was something about me that was the problem. To add to that, I am anxious and he's avoidant. In conflict, he would shut down and I would freak out, desperately trying to make things right. After 8 months, he, out of the blue, broke up with me on my birthday. He did not communicate his needs through our time together and let things build up. We tried to make it work again, but he told me he did not feel like he could love me the way I wanted. He said that neither of us should have to change or be uncomfortable or in order to make each other happy. He also struggled to say I love you. He grew up in a home where he was physically abused and neglected. I don't really know the extent, but I know it affected things. We both care for each other deeply, and the breakup has been really hard. He's given mixed signals because he says he wants to be with me and loves me, but doesn't know how to love me in the way that I need. Do you think this is more of his attachment issues that are affecting things, or is it that we are incompatible? Okay, what a great question. So do you want to kick this one off, Mike?
Sure. Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack in there for sure. It is a little frustrating for sure if you guys feel like you have opposite love languages. If you crave touch and like to give touch, obviously you really hope your partner will as well. It is nice that your partner has that opposite love language, acts of service and gift giving. So it's cool that you're recognizing that. A lot of people wouldn't even maybe recognize. They're like, oh, my partner just doesn't love me at all. But you can see that your partner is actually trying and showing love, but it's just in a different form. Aside from that, like the saying I love you is super vulnerable. Like it just sounds like a lot of the things that you want him to do are really, really vulnerable for him and scary. Probably in childhood, that wasn't, modeled a lot for him. Maybe it wasn't said to him a lot. So, maybe his inner environment, he's not saying that a lot to himself. So it's really hard to sort of give that to someone else if you're not totally giving it to yourself. Saying I love you for an avoidant person is actually like super, super vulnerable. I know for a lot of people, you feel like it's normal. You say I love you to your friends, I love you to your mom, your dad, all that kind of thing. But for an avoidant, like that is a really, really scary thing because saying I love you is like really close. It's like one of the closest things you can bring someone together with. And closeness for the avoidant, as we know, is kind of like, whoa, like we want to keep things a little bit at distance. It feels a little more comfortable, a little more safe. So I just want to give recognition that like saying I love you can be super, super tough. And I know for myself in the past, I felt, oh, if I say I love you, that's like me, like etching in stone, like me and you are like, we're together, we're attached, which is not a bad thing. But back then I thought, oh man, if I say I love you, like this is pretty much committing me to super duper closeness with the other person. So it wouldn't be used as liberally or easily as somebody would have liked to. So yeah, I don't know if you've had that experience in the past, and I know you dated avoidant people before too, but like, did you have a time where you felt, hey, why is my partner not like saying I love you freely? Like it's something that couples should be doing, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I've dated avoidant people. I'm trying to think. So like obviously Graham was mostly avoidant. Well, like it's probably like 60-40
Yeah.
avoidant secure, or maybe like 65-35-ish. But he was pretty good about that. Like, I don't think he ever didn't say that much, but he was like, we were doing the work in the relationship pretty early. So I think that like he was already making more strides towards becoming secure during that time. And then I'm trying to think like I dated a fearful avoidant for a long time before that. And then like two anxious people. And those were really my serious relationships. I dated briefly other avoidants, but nothing in like a serious way. So I haven't particularly had that personally happen, but I've sure seen that a whole bunch of times in client practice. Like I've seen that, thousands of times between PDS and clients and workshops. And, I would hear the same thing. Like I'd hear dismissive avoidants say things like, yeah, when I like say I love you to this person, I feel like there's no taking it back. And I like use those words very sparingly. And I feel like I actually had people who were dismissive avoidant clients who said, I don't want to say them more than once in my life. I actually had a client who was like, in his mid 40s. And he was like, I've never said I love you. I'm waiting until I find the person I'm going to say I love you to, because there's so much like, I think part of it was like an intention and it was positively framed for him. But I actually think deep down, he was just very avoidant. And there was like, it was almost this protective mechanism to not say those words.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely a huge component.
For sure. I'm just laughing in my head because that how silly the way I thought about it before. Like I said, I feel like if you say it, you're like signing like a blood contract of
Yeah.
like, I am loving you forever for the rest of your life, and we are now enmeshed, and you can never leave me, and that's it.
One thing I
So
do relate to though, and I will say this, I don't relate to like that side of being like blood contract kind of feeling.
yeah.
Like I usually would express even when I was fearful avoidant like fairly freely. But one thing I
Mhm.
do relate to is how freaking scary it is to say those words. Like how like you can't even like breathe. It's
Yeah.
so scary. And I think that's like the vulnerability piece, having that avoidant side in the past.
Yeah, yeah, totally. No, yeah, it's tough, but kudos to the people who, go first. I always remember in relationships, you're like, who's supposed to say this first? And it's always the first person who's, putting themselves out there for rejection, or, for somebody to not say the same thing back. So I just think it's really brave to people, and especially APs who are a little more open with their love giving, which is it's quite beautiful. But hopefully avoidance can start to do that as well. Just because you say you love someone doesn't mean you have to be attached at the hip with them, and be with them until death do you part.
100%, 100%. So what do you think about the part of the question where this individual says that like the avoidant, he struggles to say I love you, but then like since they've broken up, he's like the breakup's been really hard. He's given me mixed signals because he says he wants to be with me and loves me, but doesn't know how to love me in the way that I need. What's your take on that part?
So yeah, he's probably missing you and missing your presence. And then a lot of avoidants say that anyway. Like they say, oh, I'm worried that I'm not good enough for you. I'm worried that I'm not going to be able to give you what you need, which is really funny because that's not really their decision. Like the other person saying, no, like you give me exactly what I need. Like I'm happy with you. But an avoidant in order to stay sort of safe, will be like, oh, I know I'm eventually going to screw up. You're eventually going to leave me. So yeah, there's fear on both sides. There's the avoidant thinking you are going to leave them eventually. You're going to see sort of how broken and defective and not good enough how they are, and probably you're going to leave them at some point in time. But an avoidant needs to realize they're awesome, and there's a reason why someone has picked them. And if somebody is showing that they want to commit to you and put in effort and energy, you need to like honor that and be like, okay, like they're focusing on my good traits, they're focusing on my positive traits. Maybe I should be doing the same thing as well, like, because the simplest thing that helped me in my life a long time ago was focus on what you do have, not what you don't. So you could look at so many things that you have that are good in your personality, in your life, and all these different things. And when you start to put sort of the view in that end of things, then you start to see like, hey, like I'm pretty awesome. So I kind of lost the original question, but yeah, those are my thoughts there.
Yeah, and I think, to add into that, there's this part where a lot of like this is so like textbook dismissive avoidant where they'll say, I care about you, I miss you, even I love you, but I don't know how to love you the way that you need. And there's this deep wound for a lot of dismissive avoidance. It's like I'm incapable, like I can't do that. Like, and underneath that often is like, yeah, there is something inherently wrong or flawed about me that I can't do love in that way, or I don't have the energy or bandwidth to show up and want to show up intentionally the way that you need. And it's so funny because I think that when it comes down to that, it feels like, and I want to go back to like the original part of like the different love languages, but it feels often like, okay, this person's not capable, something's flawed with them deep down. But the reality is that like the things that dismissive avoidants are often shaming themselves for are not that big of a deal. Like okay, I need more time alone than somebody else. Okay, let me just communicate that openly. Or I have different needs in different ways, and let me just communicate that openly. But what happens is dismissive avoidants often shame themselves for things that aren't that shameful, that
Right.
probably the average person wouldn't shame themselves for. Like I would see all the time in my practice, like dismissive avoidants would shame themselves for like eating junk food or like watching too much television or things like that. And it's like, okay, like that could be something you work on if it's not healthy and if it's too much, but it's not like shameful. Like it's not like, oh, you're this terribly shameful person for that reason. And like they really beat themselves up for a lot of stuff. So I think there's probably this barrier here where he really cares about you. Obviously, he is expressing that. That's honestly a lot more than I usually see after a breakup with somebody who's a dismissive avoidant. But I also think that when you come back here, it also is him being in a position where he doesn't know how to bridge that gap. And I think a lot of it's really love language based. And I do think that like this is such an important place where a deadline applies. Because if you're both still expressing love out of the relationship, you're still both investing in the relationship in these different ways, then like you want to be like, hey, let's both pour into probably a few key things. Number one, really trying to speak in each other's love languages, even if it's unnatural. Like him making time to do a little bit of exposure work. He can do it in small doses so it doesn't like disrupt his nervous system, but a little exposure work on physical touch. If somebody has an aversion to physical touch because of how intimate it feels, because there's so much neglect in their childhood or background, what's going to happen is physical touch will just feel a little too vulnerable, and vulnerability feels unsafe to avoidance. And so what you do is you don't go like, let's go a million miles an hour down the physical touch road. You go into like small things on a daily basis and just setting up good habits so that it doesn't like disrupt and dysregulate his nervous system a ton to feel like, oh, this is so intimate. You know, a little more hand holding, a little more cuddling for shorter or, you know, for slightly longer periods of time. And as you sort of ease into that and make that a practice, it's also actually very healing for the dismissive avoidant. And then the other thing is, when it comes to quality time, like it doesn't have to be all of this quality time, but things like being more present during your time together will make it higher quality. So if you can do those things and have him practice those things and you can communicate those needs very clearly and directly, he's going to see, oh, those are tangible, simple things I can do. It's not like I have to become some different person. I just have these little strategies for how I show up behaviorally that can be tweaked a little bit that are actually healthy and good for me to do. And I'm going to see that betters the relationship. And in fact, I can love my partner in the way that they need. And then the last part too that I would just add before I turn this back to you, Mike, is I think on the side of the acts of service and gift giving, obviously you making sure that you're making an effort to speak in those love languages as well through doing acts of service, through giving little thoughtful gifts. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, but bridging that love language gap, giving healthy, like very spliced down clear strategies for how to bridge that love language gap and then moving the needle accordingly, I think is going to be really powerful for the relationship dynamic. So is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, so much good stuff that you just shared. The one thing I really wanted to hone in on that I know was helpful for me and it helped me, you mentioned sort of exposure work and like smaller incremental steps. If somebody's asking, like, because as an AP, they're gonna want like a lot of affection. Like when let's say you go to sleep at night, like an AP would love it if you're like holding each other in their arms all night. But for a DA, and I know for myself, I'm like, that is not happening. Like I need my kind of space when I go to sleep. However, if my partner were to suggest, hey, like, can we like hold each other and cuddle for like 5 minutes before we go to bed each night? That's something small. That's not a big deal. The DA doesn't feel like, oh, shoot, I'm trapped. It's just like, yeah, of course, I can cuddle for 5 minutes. And then after the 5 minutes, you can sort of go on your side of the bed and go to sleep. So I just find when you ask for these small incremental things, that can, like you said, not trigger sort of the fear response or the trapped response. And DAs, as we mentioned, do like to show up and actually like be good in the relationship. Like they want to actually show up well and they don't think they're good in it. So if they can actually do something and make their partner happy, they'll continue to do it. So it just has to be in like that smaller incremental steps. The sleep is one example. Maybe, you know, after we're intimate, hey, can we just lie there and hold each other for 5 minutes or so? And I just think it's these small things, these small steps that are going to show the DA, like, give them a little few personal wins and be like, hey, this is actually not too bad. And then just grow from there.
100%. And one thing I used to tell clients all the time is time box it. Like for a DA partner, and like this isn't the end game for anybody listening, but if you say, like, let's say you need like to have an important conversation, and let's say you go in and you talk to your DA partner, and maybe they're like working on something, and you're like, hey, I need to talk. I need to have an important conversation with you. Often the dismissive avoidant mind is like, you need to talk to me forever, for 9 hours, forever. I'm going to be trapped forever. And I have to start like drop everything right this second and do it.
Yeah.
And like, instead, if you're like, hey, I need to have an important conversation. I need you to be present with me for like 10, 15 minutes. Let me know when you're ready. Like time boxing it makes it so much easier, because really what's happening is, honestly, dismissive avoidants tend to catastrophize and magnify. It's a form of cognitive distortion from trauma. These things in their mind, thinking like it's going to be this huge, really long thing, when a lot of the times it's like really not that. So that's like such a great, I love that we talked about that in detail, because we should share that more often, because it's actually so useful to time box things. And that's exactly what you said. Like if somebody's like, hey, can we cuddle for 5 minutes, or things like that, it's very tangible. It's easy. It doesn't make anybody feel overwhelmed. And then over time, you can build momentum on those things where, once you've had that conversation enough times and you ask to cuddle, the person doesn't assume, oh, you have to cuddle me for the whole night, and, I'm trapped wrapping, I can't move while I'm sleeping. Like, you don't go to those places because you've aired this out enough times that it's just the new normal in the relationship. Or if you're like, hey, I want to have a conversation about something or share something with you, the person's not like, oh, I'm trapped in this like 4-hour conversation. Oh yeah, I'll have a conversation, because you're used to it being 10 minutes or 15 minutes. So like that for sure is such a good hack and strategy. I love that you brought that up. That's amazing.
Yeah, for sure. It's like, also like, imagine you wanted more like eye contact with your partner. You wouldn't be like, hey, can we just sit here and look in each other's eyes for 10 minutes? That is super vulnerable. But you can start out by doing like a 30-second eye gazing exercise, then a minute, and then build it up to more. I don't want to put DAs on the spot or make it really uncomfortable, but eye gazing is one of the most like connective activities you can do with your partner. A lot of partners have actually like not stopped and stared into their partner's eyes for like, I don't know, longer than 30 seconds. So it's something you just might want to think about if your partner's ever open to it, to consider eye gazing exercises. They're really great, actually.
You just gave a testimonial to yourself as being like a non-DA person.
Yeah.
You've healed from being dismissive avoidant when you're like actively suggesting eye gazing.
All the DAs out there are gonna hate me. They'll be like, "Oh, my partner's gonna ask me tonight to do eye gazing." Sorry.
That's amazing. I love that. Okay, we're gonna take a quick break, and when we come back, we are gonna dive into some disorganized attachment discussions, but how to really tell the difference between something that may be just an anxious or even disorganized attachment set of patterns versus something that could be a little bit more intense, maybe down the lines of narcissistic personality disorder or narcissistic traits. We will be right back. By the way, if you want to do a deeper dive into attachment styles, relationships, core wounds, and needs, you can get my book, Learning Love, on Amazon right now. It provides everything you need to know about why you act the way that you do in relationships, where your core wounds come from, and how to actually move through them, and how you can find and maintain a thriving romantic connection that will bring you true happiness by becoming securely attached. All of the empowered relationships you have in your external world come from a healthy, secure relationship to yourself first, and I'll teach you how to get there. The link to Learning Love is in the description just down below. Welcome back to our last segment of the day for Can This Be Fixed? Today, we are going to talk about, in this third part here, disorganized attachment. So our next question from Sir MK says, can you please direct me to more disorganized attachment? I've just discovered about attachment behaviors, and it's such an eye-opener. I related so much to the disorganized one, and it's both great to finally know, but also sad to realize all the things. I just broke up with somebody with strong, anxious behavior, and it was chaos for me. Such complex emotions. She was actually super toxic when scared, full-blown manipulation, gaslighting, lying, and had lots of partners, so has just moved on fast, and I'm almost left wondering what reality really is. I'm so keen to dive into healing this now that I finally know what's going on. So let's talk about this. Sir MK, If this is something that you are experiencing, it can be so difficult. And I think we can go through and actually talk a little bit about, and maybe I'll kick this one off this time, Mike. But I think it's really important to first just start by realizing some of the major differences between what's typical anxious behavior versus what could be a lot more than that. So, if somebody is talking to me and they are sharing a little bit about an ex, and that ex is like anxious, maybe violates their boundaries sometimes, maybe love bombs a little at the beginning of relationships. And then, that over time they cling or they have things like that. Those would be things you would see as like typical anxious behavior. Things that are not typical anxious attachment style behavior are manipulation, gaslighting, and lots of lying, discarding and moving on so fast all of a sudden, and having tons of partners at once. Like those are things that are actually honestly more characteristic of a narcissistic personality disorder. So I'm going to list a few things off, and I think it's really going to be helpful for you, and maybe Mike and I can talk a little bit about how to heal disorganized attachment, some good resources, good places to start, some important, things to focus on when it comes to healing your disorganized attachment style. But I want to talk about, because your main question also was about your ex. And I just want to highlight that I don't think that this is an anxious attachment style person. Again, I can't like diagnose this person. I don't know them, things like that. But I do want to just highlight that that is not typical of just somebody being anxiously attached. So some big differences that you're going to see is when you have somebody who's a narcissist instead of just an anxious attachment style, you're going to see a few other things. So you're going to see a lot of like in their personality that they need a lot of attention on an ongoing basis. They need like a lot of admiration. They tend to make their interactions really about them getting admired or kind of like proving how great they are. They have this like grandiosity happening in the background. And they also tend to feel like they are extra important, right? They have this, elevated sense of self-importance. Now, funnily enough, when it comes to grandiosity, and this is maybe what you see in more covert narcissists, but when it comes to grandiosity, it won't necessarily be outward grandiosity. Like if it's somebody who's covert narcissist, they may have their grandiosity through their sad story. So sometimes somebody will be like going through this hard time, and like, so their story is so much harder than someone else's. And you'll see this come up a lot in partnership relationships where somebody will, they suffered the most or have it the worst or things like that. And they almost derive their sense of grandiosity through that. And then some other things you'll see is they tend to be really preoccupied with like unlimited power, success, beauty, brilliance. They can sometimes be entitled in the relationship. They may think that they're extra special and unique and can only be around other high power, status, special, unique kind of people. It's very status oriented. And they can be manipulative, exploitative. They can lack empathy when it comes to you and what you're feeling and going through. And there can be a lot of like envy, type dynamics that they struggle with. So I just, for the first part of this, and I'll let Mike kind of take it from here about disorganized resources and, healing fearful avoidant attachment style and some good focus areas to dive into so that can be the work that you do. But I think, just from like her and looking at the perspective with her, I want to encourage you to notice that there's probably a little more going on here than anxious attachment style. And that may be that there is potentially some narcissism in regards to actual narcissistic personality disorder, or at least strong traits, because that's where you're really going to see the gaslighting, the lying, the discard. Narcissists will often discard after a relationship, whereas anxious attachment styles will not. Anxious attachment styles, they do need like love and connection a lot, but not necessarily admiration or grandiosity. It's a very different relationship there. And they won't like lie all the time, manipulate, gaslight. Like you're just not going to see those things. And often when somebody leaves a relationship who is a narcissist and they discard their ex, it can leave somebody feeling exactly like what you said. I'm almost left wondering what reality really is. And that's such a big signpost of somebody having been in a relationship with a narcissist, which can be a huge mind warp. So with that being said, the second part of this is really you being able to heal and dig into your own resources for healing disorganized and fearful avoidant attachment. So if you want to kick off from there, Mike, and dive into some recommendations there, I'd love to hear.
Specifically, obviously, FAs have specific core wounds that they're going to need to address. Some of the things like unworthiness, undeserving, I'm not good enough, I'm not special, I'm unseen, I don't matter, I'm unimportant. So probably a lot of the things that your ex-partner, or this person in the question, was doing to you is what you're doing to yourself on the inside, and things that you're saying to yourself. I'm unimportant, I'm not good enough. So of course you're going to stay sort of in a dynamic like that where it feels right. They're sort of feeding into your core wounds. So it's just imperative that you work on these core wounds. Otherwise, you're going to keep unconsciously, and that's the scary thing, unconsciously keep going towards these types of dynamics. So they're going to feel like they're the right fit. That's the scary thing about all this work. The scary and beautiful thing is that most of the things, the people we're hanging out with, the decisions we're making, is all subconscious. So we think we're making the decision to choose this person, when really it's our subconscious mind going towards these types of dynamics. Because really, like, you're not an unintelligent person. You know that this person is not good for you, but you're staying in this dynamic for probably a lot longer than you should have. It's not because you're not intelligent and not smart. It's because your subconscious mind is bringing you towards this, because familiarity equals safety. So your subconscious mind just wants you to feel safe and know what's coming down the pipeline, know what's predictable. And this feels very predictable, kind of feels like, this is home, even though it's not healthy. So another area that FAs definitely need to put their focus in is boundary setting. A lot of times an FA didn't have boundaries at all. They were just it was a one-way street in childhood of what they had to do, and they didn't really have a voice. So in adulthood, it's hard to sort of speak up for ourselves and talk to another person and let them know, what they said was hurtful or what they did was, disrespectful. So boundaries is definitely an area that needs to be cultivated. Super scary at first, not gonna lie, but once you start learning how to set boundaries and seeing that it's not as scary as you think it's going to be, and how people actually generally react quite positively if you set a boundary properly, boundaries are just an amazing thing to help you in your life. Another area would be meeting your own needs. A lot of times FAs are sort of overly concerned on how the other person's feeling. Is the other person happy? Is the other person comfortable? Again, this is in childhood. The more we make sure that our caregivers are comfortable and not angry and happy, the less, punishment we'll get, or maybe love withheld from us. So again, an FA would really want to focus on putting the attention into themselves, making sure, how they feel before they give, and kind of knowing what they need and then communicating that to another person. Those are a few kind of key areas. Can you see any others that
I think that's such a great place to start. There's generally the major areas are going to be the core wounds, like you said, your needs. Regulating your nervous system is a great thing to practice. Having the boundaries, healthy communication, all those things are really the solid places to start. And I would say, to Sir MK here, that those are the best, everything Mike said are the best and most important places to start, because as you heal those core wounds, you learn to meet your own needs and communicate them and have healthy boundaries. That's where you're going to really see the crux of the programming that you have that's making you insecurely attached move into a much more secure space. And it really starts with the relationship to self. So as much as I'm sorry to hear for Sir MK that you are coming out of a relationship and it can be really hard to go through a breakup, I actually think it's such a blessing in disguise, because it really sounds to me like this person that was lying and gaslighting and manipulating wasn't ready to be in a healthy relationship and wasn't capable at this time, or maybe not for a long time. And so it's really good that you're getting that space to come back to yourself, to focus on yourself and what you need for healing and growth. And by giving that to you, that's going to be how you see that needle move. And that's going to be hopefully the catalyst that brings you back into relationship to self and allows you to then in the future have amazing, thriving relationships, because you know how to operate in a healthy way and you've had the opportunity to really heal within you first.
Beautifully said. A shout out to all the FAs out there doing the work. FA for sure is a difficult, insecure attachment style to have. Shout out to Joanna, who works at PDS. She says being FA is like walking in a minefield. There's triggers every few steps. You'll hit a trigger. But the beautiful thing is that can be changed, and these triggers don't have to be so explosive once you do the inner work. So FAs don't stop doing the inner work. You can do it.
Love that. I couldn't agree more. And having been FA and doing a lot of the work, it's so worth it coming out on the other side and just having peace of mind. So
Yeah.
amazing stuff. Thank you, Mike, for being here today. As always, excited to dive in next week. We had a shorter session today because Mike has to catch a flight and I have a big commitment after this. So next week, we're going to go back to sharing personal dating stories. But we're wrapping today. Thank you so much. And don't forget to check us out on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. And you can, dive in there. We also have clips of this on our Instagram channel, or if you're listening on the podcast episode links, you can check us out on YouTube for the full video version. Thank you for stopping by. Excited for our next episode next week. And thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Share it with friends and family who are on their journey of personal development and growth, and thank you for listening. Next week, we'll be back with more insights to guide you on your journey. And until then, keep practicing our tools and strategies to change your subconscious mind and apply some of the powerful learnings from this podcast so that you experience real life transformation.